time, so we're respectful of everybody's evening here. So, welcome to Beaches Watch. Tonight is normally our monthly community meeting, but we're going to have a special meeting where we are going to introduce our candidates for District 11. My name is Maria Mark, and I am the interim president for Beaches Watch. So, happy to see so many people here. Just for those who are not familiar with Beaches Watch, we are a nonprofit organization where we are member-based and we like to inform our citizens of the beaches issues coming up that affect their life. So when they go to the polls or when they meet with their elected officials here, they can make informed choices. Speaking of elected officials, I think I saw Scott Wiley next to me. So that's good. So when you came in, I hope you signed in and I hope you took an agenda. Our agenda announces upcoming meetings. And so for those, we are also videotaping our meetings. So for their benefit, I can just kind of briefly go over what's coming up. We are in the process of renewing our Beaches Watch membership. You can join for $15 for individual, $20 for family, and we have $5 for students. The memberships are valid from January through December, and you can join right now. Arlene is our membership director, and so she'll be happy to take your money. Coming up at the end of this month, on Wednesday, September 26th, we will be working, co-hosting with the Beaches Library reflections of 50 years of consolidation. So we'll have a panel of some of the key people who were involved to make that happen, and they'll kind of go through the history of it and hopefully talk about some of the good things that's happened since the consolidation. And that will be here in the community room from 6 until 9:30. We're also hosting another candidate forum. This is for the Neptune Beach candidates. This will be Wednesday, October 3rd. It will also be here in the Neptune Beach Library. It will start at 7 o'clock. And then the Jacksonville Beach Candidate Forum will be the following Wednesday, so that's October 10th, and that will be in the Jacksonville Beach Community Center, which we also refer to it as the Sunshine Park Community Center. So it's right next door to Sunshine Park. And that will be at 7 o'clock as well. We are accepting nominations for our 2018 Give Back donation. These nominations are due November 9th. So we are requesting for you to submit a nomination. This will be our 9th annual one for to award a nonprofit organization that has enriched the lives of our beaches community. Prior recipients have been Dial a Ride, Beaches Council for the Disabled, the Grant Beautification Committee, Splendid Ear Outreach Ministries, Beaches Community Kitchen, just to name a few. So it's a way of us recognizing those organizations that really do enhance our quality of life. Let's see. On the back of the agenda is also the contact information for all of our elected officials, Atlantic Beach, Neptune Beach, and Jacksonville Beach, as well as our City of Jacksonville representative, Bill Gulliver. We also have our state representative, which is currently Byrd, and our Florida State Senate, which is currently Aaron Mead. So grab an agenda on your way out if you don't have one now. Tonight's forum is more of a town hall. We thought that we would change it up a little bit. We don't have any prepared questions, but what we will do is we'll ask the candidates to come up, and they will have up to 15 minutes each to introduce themselves, to talk to you about their platform, and what they would do for us at the beaches if elected. So I would like to introduce our incumbent, Byrd. Come up and have a seat. And challenger is Nathcelly Rohrbaugh. So we flipped a coin, and we'll have Byrd go first. So,
Thank you, Maria, and good evening to everybody. Last time I was here a few months ago with you, I was doing a legislative update, so tonight's something a little different. Because in our current state of politics, very much it's often we get a caricature of who people who run for office really are. And you don't really learn a whole lot when you get a glossy mailer either for somebody or against somebody, or a 30-second TV ad or a radio ad. So tonight I want to tell you, for those of you who don't know me, and maybe even some of those who do know me, a little bit about why I put myself forward in public office and why I'm honored to be your current state representative. But I want to begin by talking about somebody who recently passed away, who many of you probably know. This past Saturday, we attended the memorial service of Reverend Peyton Hopkins. And Peyton Hopkins, who is not only a reverend at Community Presbyterian Church and one of my pastors, he was also president of the Beaches Democrat Club for many, many years. And Peyton and I used to have wonderful discussions. And it was great because that's something that's sorely missing in our current politics, is Americans and Floridians and people who live at the beaches just being able to sit down and talk to each other without putting labels of Republican, Democrat, conservative, and liberal. We have too much of that. We just need to get back as Americans to talking to each other. And so Peyton and I would have wonderful conversations. We would talk. Peyton was a Democrat. You don't be president of the Democrat Club if you're not a liberal. And I'm a conservative. I'm a Republican. But we would sit down and we would talk about the issues. We would do it respectfully. And every time we would leave, I think each of us learned something else from the other one. That's what we need to get back to in our politics, is talking to each other and not trying to demonize each other and just try to score cheap political points. One of the things that Peyton said to me was, he said, "Cord," and this is probably the greatest compliment I've ever been paid by anyone since I've been in office. Peyton said to me, "Cord, I don't always agree with you, but I always know where you stand." Because and that's one of the things that's missing in our politics, is that citizens are distrustful of politicians because they don't always tell them the truth. And I think that anybody who knows me, whether you agree or disagree with me, would agree with Peyton, that you may not always agree with what I say, but you always know where I stand. And one of the passages that Peyton and I used to talk about was Proverbs 31, 8 and 9. Because we all have different motivations for why we run and why we do what we do. And if you know Peyton, he was out there, he was working in the community, he was working with the homeless. I mean, he was a tireless worker for the beaches community. But in Proverbs 31, 8 and 9, it says this: "Speak up for those who can't speak for themselves. Speak up for those the poor and the destitute. Judge rightly." And I'm paraphrasing, I probably didn't get that exactly right. But that was Peyton's motivation for why he did what he did, and that's my motivation for why I do what I do. Because not only am I a state representative, but I'm also an attorney and have been for the last 20 years. And I'm proudly run as a constitutionalist. Anybody who knows me, you know I'm always talking about the Constitution. CJ, is that right? Always talking about the Constitution. Because the Constitution, when I took my oath of office, as does every single elected official, when you raise your right hand and you take that oath, you swear an allegiance to the Constitution. Not to the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, not to a governor, not to a president, not to any interest group. You take your oath to the Constitution. That's what I did, and that's what I do every single day. That not only am I in Tallahassee as your state legislator, but also as an attorney, going into state court, going into federal court. I've represented people of every race, religion, background, sexual orientation. It doesn't matter to me, because when those people walk into my office and they have a legal issue, all I care about is whether or not the law is on their side and whether or not we can go into court and prove it. That's what matters, not someone's. We've got to get away from the identity politics. It is destroying America. It's dividing us as people. And what's great about the Florida legislature, I can tell you, is that it is bipartisan. We do reach across the aisle. We have a wonderful delegation here in Duval County. I work with Tracy Davis, and Tim Daniels, and Senator Audrey Gibson. And we come together, and more often than not, we agree on legislation, and we come together. I'll give you a perfect example. The 5-Star Veterans Facility, which is in Arlington. My wife, Esther, who's in the back with my daughter, Lexi. After 9/11, Esther joined the Marine Corps. Her father was a Marine. And so service is very important to our family. So one of the things that I have championed as a member of the legislature is getting involved with Veterans Affairs. Florida is the most veteran-friendly state in the country. And so I talked to Colonel Dayton Werfel, also a member of Community Presbyterian Church, and this is what's wonderful about being in the legislature, because you can come together and take an idea from somebody and get it passed into law. So 5-Star Veterans Home in Arlington helps veterans who are coming back from service get back on their feet, transition back into civilian life. The military doesn't often do a great job at that. And so we were able to, the delegation pulled together Democrats and Republicans, because it's a bipartisan issue to help our vets and make sure that they become functioning members of society again. So that's just one example of some of the things that we do, where we can come together and not be divisive. But I want to tell you a little bit more about me. So I'm a native of the beach. I'm a beach boy. I was born right here. My family has been been present at the beaches for more than 100 years. I'm a 5th generation Floridian. My grandparents lived between Walnut and Cherry Street. My dad lived over in Jack's Beach. My grandmother graduated from Fletcher in 1942. My mom, Jenny Byrd, is here. You probably saw her out waving signs. And my dad, Jim Byrd, is in the back, and they're both proud Fletcher graduates. So I started my life at the old Tahitian Village Apartments right there on Pittman Road, and we used to walk to Fletcher football games. I know we have a Fletcher student right here. She's getting her social studies credits tonight, so we can put her on the spot. But the beaches are in my blood. We're down there every day. So I went to law school in Miami and I practiced law for the first 8 years in West Palm Beach. And when the first opportunity I had to move back here, I moved back to Neptune Beach. This is where I wanted to raise my family. We're down on those beaches every single day. We're teaching our daughter about the shared resources that are our beaches. So when we go down there and we see the sea turtle nest, we explain to her why we mark those and why we need to protect them and protect the sea turtles. We talk about the dunes and how you don't walk on them, and the sea oats. We walk down the beach and we pick up trash, because it is our beaches are a shared resource that we all have to protect. And I can tell you this. And I see the Free Our Beaches buttons. I would never have voted for a bill that privatized the beaches. That is false. It did not happen. And I hope as part of our discussion tonight we will get into it. Because as an attorney, I read the law and I go into court and argue it. And as a legislator, I read the bills, I talk to the sponsors, and I know what the bill says, and what it does, and what it doesn't do. So tonight, I hope we can actually have a conversation about the truth. Because as Bernard Baruch said, every person is entitled to their opinion, but no individual is entitled to their own set of facts. And so tonight, I hope we can have a real, honest, open discussion of the facts and what the law does and doesn't do. And not just on that, because Beaches Watch is interested in not only the beaches, but our entire quality of life. And so when we get into the Q&A, I want to talk a little bit about what we are doing as a state, the hundreds of millions of dollars that we are putting into, especially water resources. Water and water quality is going to be a vital issue in the coming years. Florida is now the 3rd largest state. We have millions of people moving in every single year. They're fleeing California and New York, high tax, high regulatory states, and they're coming here because Florida is doing it right. And it's been doing it right under our current leadership and under the leadership of the Florida legislature. We understand the responsibility to protect those resources. And I won't give you a bunch of numbers now. When we get into the Q&A, I'll definitely be able to share some of those things with you. But just, what's my time, Maria?
You have about 5 more minutes.
5 more minutes, okay. So let me talk a little bit about the Constitution. And I brought the one with me that I got in 11th grade. This is the Constitution I got in 11th grade in my AP American Government class. It's been with me every day that I went to undergrad. It's been with me every day that I'm in law school. It's with me every day that I'm in the Florida legislature. Because this is all that really matters. This is what matters, the Constitution, because it protects. The Constitution is meant to protect the rights of the minority, not the rights of the majority. And it's been wonderful watching the Kavanaugh hearings, not the parts where people heckle and yell and shout out, because that's not ordered liberty, it's not civility, which is kind of what I talked about, what we need to get back to. But this is why I run. This is why I serve. Because this is what makes us different from every other nation in the world, which is a written constitution. So you're not supposed to brag. My parents didn't raise me to do that. But I'll tell you this. So when I was in law school, I was the #1 student in Common Law 1 and Common Law 2. When I took the Florida bar exam, my answer on the Florida constitutional law question was selected by the Florida bar as the model answer to teach other students about the Constitution and what they should do. So I take it seriously. I'm proud of the fact that not only do I advocate for the Constitution when I'm in Tallahassee, but I advocate for the Constitution every single day, talking to constituents and talking to people who have a problem with the law. Esther's my paralegal, and we give away or donate hundreds of hours every year of pro bono legal services because there's such a need. And one of the things that frustrates me, and it's one of the reasons why I ran, is because people should not need to hire a lawyer to deal with their government. Government is so big, the bureaucracy is so frustrating that people cannot even get a straight answer out of their government. That frustrates me to no end. So having had to deal with people on the back end of the law, after the law has been passed, I said, I want to run, I want to go to Tallahassee because I want to fix the laws on the front end. I want to be there as an advocate for those people who are so frustrated, who are fighting. I fought Fortune 500 companies. I fought against government. I love holding government accountable. It's what motivates me, what drives me, because we, the people, are the ones who are in charge. But it sometimes doesn't feel that way. We're frustrated, we're angry, we're frustrated with government because it's complicated, it's big, and it's not responsive to the people. That's why I ran, so that we can try to change that. It's an honor being your state representative, and I hope to look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Nathcelly Rohrbaugh. I know that's a peculiar name and a bit ethnically ambiguous, so let me start there. I am the son both of an immigrant who traveled from Mexico in 1984 to come to the United States, and I'm the descendant of an immigrant who traveled from England in 1630 aboard the Rohrbaugh, which was John Winthrop's flagship, and landed in Salem. So my roots in this country are both very old and quite big. My name Nathcelly I got from my mother. As a young woman, she had the opportunity to travel to Chichen Itza, which is a Mayan ruin in the Yucatan Peninsula. And while she was sitting on the stairs of one of these ruins, she was listening to the assembled tourists ask how to say every sort of bad word that they could imagine in the Mayan language, because the tour guide was a Mayan linguist. And finally, my mother, growing impatient, raised her hand, figuring she should probably know a positive word before she left. And she said, "How do you say I love you?" And it's Nathcelly. I love you. I graduated from the University of Florida with a degree in chemistry, specifically biochemistry, and a minor in business administration. I am a stay-at-home dad who takes care of my two wonderful children, Sophia, who just started 6th grade, and Orion, who is 7. My wife and I, Danielle, we are going to be opening up our own small business in Fernandina Beach, hopefully by the end of this year, probably next year. Fernandina Beach has been my home. We both graduated high school there. We plan on spending our life in Nassau County, and my children are going to be graduating from high school there. So I have a vested interest in helping build a stronger community than the one that exists now. I decided to get into this race after the Parkland school shooting. I'm running because, as Cord said, our politics have just grown very dysfunctional. And we can't talk to each other about difficult issues without it being contentious, without names being called, without us assuming bad intention on the other side. We need to fix our politics. If we can't get to a point where we're talking to each other as fellow Americans, as fellow Floridians, as fellow members of Northeast Florida, we're going to continue to fall prey to the special interests and the corporate interests who benefit from us having this divisive politics. Because the powers that be want the system to stay the same. They are content with the status quo. They're profiting off of it. And they'll keep us divided as long as they can. Before the end of this election, we're all going to be receiving mailers, trying to build one of us up or tear the other one down. And we all know that the NRA is going to be one of the groups that sends us mailers. Most of us here agree that we need universal background checks on all gun sales. Most of us here agree that we need to be enforcing all of the laws on the books. But the NRA, a lobbying organization not from our community, who doesn't care about the well-being of our community, is going to be actively trying to make sure that we don't have that debate. They're going to put their thumb on the scale, and they're going to try to get the outcome that they continue to get, which is no action. That's why I'm running, because I'm tired of inaction. The Constitution gives us the power to deal with difficult situations in our communities. It empowers us to be able to make a change when we need to. But we found ourselves at this point utterly paralyzed because our voices don't matter. If you want to see if a piece of legislation will pass, you are better off polling the special interests and the lobbying groups that are trying to get that piece of legislation passed to see if it's going to pass. Because at this point, public opinion has a near zero effect on whether or not we address any issue. And I'm over it. I don't accept that that's going to be the world that my children grow up into. I don't accept that that has to be the Florida that we live in. We can solve gun violence. It's going to be hard. It's going to take a long time. It didn't happen overnight, and one piece of legislation isn't going to change it. But we need to start sooner than later, because we're losing tens of thousands of American lives annually, and we have the power to stop it. Now, as I said, I'm a scientist and I'm a father. Education, to me, is the most important issue. For the past 20 years, we've had a government in Tallahassee which has been undermining our public schools. They've wanted to privatize our schools, and they've gone about a step-by-step process of weakening our public schools to make fertile ground for the argument of school choice, of school privatization. They've disrespected our teachers, they've weakened and attacked their unions, and they've passed laws that have made it so that property tax and other revenues can be siphoned away by for-profit or non-profit private schools and charter schools. Also, over the past 20 years, we've seen the rise of standardized testing. We have been over-testing our children. It takes valuable time away from actually learning. It stifles innovation and creativity in our classrooms. And it hasn't improved our schools whatsoever. The only thing that the standardized testing regimen that we currently have has done is give a competitive advantage to charter schools and to private schools. If we think that we're going to have economic success in the long term with a weak public education system, we're deluding ourselves. There are going to be high-skilled jobs coming to our state, and if we don't have high-skilled workers, they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. And as we sit here right now, there's plenty of high-skilled jobs that our children could be taking advantage of. HVAC, plumbing, electrical work, carpentry. But in so many of our schools, we don't have the vocational and technical programs necessary to train them for those jobs. But it's not enough to just simply invest in vocational and technical programs, because there are lots of VOTEC programs all across the state. But most of those programs are focused on one teacher and that teacher's skills. And since we're not paying our teachers a competitive wage, when that high-skilled individual realizes they can make more money in the private sector, or they can move to a different state and earn more money there, they may choose to leave, and our children suffer. I want to go to Tallahassee and fight just day in and day out to reform our public education system. We need to stop with the high-risk testing. We need to switch to a system of mastery learning. We need to start preparing our kids with skills that they'll actually be able to use in the real world, like personal finance, civics, and media literacy. And we need to be willing to pay our teachers a competitive wage. It is not okay that over the past decade, teachers' wages have effectively gone down by 10% because their wages haven't been rising and inflation has been increasing. I don't accept that as a good recipe for success for our children and for our state. Our economy runs on education. Lastly, I'll talk about the need for us to have proper environmental policy and development. I mean, we're all seeing it right now. Development is out of control. It seems like development companies have taken control of our city councils, of our county commissions, of our state legislature, and they're deciding how residential development is going to go forward. Up until the year 2011, we had a Growth Management Act in the state. And it certainly was flawed, and it led to unaffordable housing. But the fix that was devised in the year 2011, when our current governor took office, exacerbated the situation. The current Community Planning Act makes it so that local governments have more control over development, deciding whether or not a certain area will become developed. But the thing is that they eliminated concurrency standards that say that you need to actively be adding parks and rec facilities, you need to be adding schools, and you need to be updating your transportation infrastructure as you're building residential areas, which has led to the congestion that we're seeing in our neighborhoods. We have a trust fund, the Sadowski Affordable Trust Fund, that is supposed to be used solely for affordable housing in the state. And over the past 10 years, that trust fund has been misallocated. 50% of the money, which comes out to about $1 billion over the past 10 years. We could have been using that money to build affordable housing to help address the affordable housing crisis that we have. But we haven't, because our legislators continue to demand that we cut taxes, which puts holes in the general fund, which then requires other funds to be rated to fill those holes. Like I said, we all agree that the laws that are on the books need to be enforced. But to enforce those laws, we need tax revenue to fund the programs that enforce those laws. And I feel like we're playing this insane shell game where our politicians tell us one thing, but then whenever they go to act, they don't fund the things that they're saying we need to do. And decentralizing development in the state, allowing local counties and cities to take the reins of development, has only benefited the developers. Now, if you want, you can just simply help fund someone to get onto the city council or into the county commission, which only costs tens of thousands of dollars as opposed to state-level politics, which costs much more. You can buy a county board and then just get all the development that you want. In 2016, Cord came to the Board of County Commissioners in Nassau County, where I live, and he helped lobby for Rainier's project of the Wildlife Stewardship District. It helped put a new government within our county where tens of thousands of new families are going to be moving to. That has led to a 15% property tax increase for the residents of Nassau County, because since all of the emergency services weren't planned for, since we didn't plan for new schools, we didn't plan for the parks and rec, we didn't plan for transportation, now all of a sudden we're trying to play catch-up. We realize we're going to have budgetary shortfalls in the future. And you know, we only had one county commissioner who voted against wildlife. He was just primaried out of office by someone backed by developer. This is the state of our politics right now. On every level of government, we have money helping buy seats to make sure that their interests are best served. In talking about the environment, we're seeing an active economic and ecological disaster going on in the south portion of our state. 90% of Lake Okeechobee is covered with blue-green algae. And as the rainy season comes, the Army Corps of Engineers has to open up the levees to allow water to flow out so that there isn't terrible flooding into the Everglades agricultural area and into other residential areas, which is clogging up the Caloosahatchee River and the St. Lucie River with this toxic blue-green algae, which is depleting the oxygen, which is killing life. It's creating health problems for people. It's destroying local economies. And it's now created red tide, which is killing whale sharks on the Gulf Coast. You know, in 2011, Tallahassee rolled back a lot of Department of Environmental Protection funds. They rolled back a lot of environmental protections. They made it so that it's okay to deal with 2 to 3 times the levels of phosphates and nitrates in the water that should be there. And they haven't been fining people. And ultimately, who's going to have to foot the bill for that? It's us. We're going to be the ones expected to pay the money to clean up after these companies. You know, it's all fine and good in the short term that development companies around Orlando, around Lake Okeechobee, and big agribusinesses in the Everglades agricultural area are able to make a little bit more money in the short term. But long term, it's going to crunch our budget. And when it comes time to pay for that, We're not going to have the political will to raise taxes. We're going to say, well, let's figure out what kind of essential services we can cut to cover this cost. Now, all of that being said, the common thread is money. I think if there's one battle that we need to win, it's the battle against money in politics. I encourage you all, when you go home, to go onto the Florida Department of State's website and look at our campaign finance disclosures. I took in 165 individual donations. Cord took in 190 individual donations. Cord raised $100,000 more than me, even though he only raised 25 more individual donations than I did. And the reason is the majority of his donations were $1,000 and $500 donations from moneyed interests who he's been voting in favor of. And I don't mean to sully Cord Byrd. I think he's a decent man. But the problem is that this is the way that our politics is functioning right now. If I am elected and have the honor to serve you all in Tallahassee, there is a very real chance that before I'm even inaugurated, I will start to receive donations just as Cord did in January before he got inaugurated. But I'm not going to change the way that I vote based on money coming into my campaign accounts. I'm not going to play that game. And I'm relatively certain that come the next election season, there will be someone running a Democratic primary against me to get me out of office, backed by the money that's helping Cord right now. And there will be a Republican in the race as well, backed with the same money. Because it's not about the party. Both parties are playing this game. So we need to rally together and do our best to get money out of politics. We can solve all of the problems that are facing us. We can fix our public schools. We can protect our environment. We can demand on sustainable residential growth in our communities. But we have to be willing to fight for it. I'm willing to fight for it. I'm willing to fight for you. So please, get out and vote, and let's embrace Florida's future together. Thank you.
We'll now take questions from the audience. So if you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and if you don't mind, maybe standing so everyone can hear you, because unfortunately we don't have a mic that we can pass around. So first gentleman who raised his hand back here.
Thank you. Speaking of money, this year our state government is spending $88.7 billion in 1 year, and there's 7.39 million households in Florida. That's $12,000 per household. Is it enough for both candidates?
Sure. Since I was attacked during Mr. Rohrbaugh's speech, I will take a moment to address that. So he said that I lobbied on behalf of Rainier. That would be an ethical violation. I didn't lobby on anything. The truth is, and you can read the letter, and I'll provide it to anyone who wants to see it, is that the Board of County Commissioners in Nassau County asked me, because the way it works is when you have it, all local bills must originate in the House of Representatives, in the Florida House. So it was the Board of County Commissioners who were elected by the people of Nassau County who asked me to file the bill that they had spent years negotiating. So it would have been arrogant of me to say no and stand in the way of what the Board of County Commissioners, who the people of Nassau County duly elected and thought was the best thing for Nassau County. That's the way representative government works. That's the truth. That's what actually happened.
But you
Now, Mr. Steyer, to your question. So, yes, we have an $88 billion budget. And I reject the notion that we spend every dollar wisely. We can always cut back. Just as families have to cut back in tough times, government has to cut back in tough times. It appalls me that when I sit in committee and I see interest group after interest group in government agency after government agency that come in and cry and whine and moan that they don't have enough money. It's not that they don't have enough money. We don't prioritize the money correctly, and we don't spend it wisely. And that's what I'm trying to do on the Appropriations Committee that I sit on, which is the Judiciary Appropriations Committee, which oversees the Department of Corrections, which in the state of Florida is failing. It oversees the courts. It oversees the FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So yes, we have a large budget, we can spend the money better, we can do it more wisely. And I'll give you a perfect example. Florida and New York are roughly the same size in population. New York has a budget that is twice that of the state of Florida. I know we are doing it better because if you look at who's going down I-95, it's not people heading north from Florida to New York, it's people from New York heading south to Florida, because here we have economic responsibility. We put billions of dollars in reserves. We have put record amounts of money into education. We have put record amounts of money into Bright Future Scholarship. We're AAA bond rated. We're #1 in the nation on our credit rating. So I could go on and on. Our unemployment rate is at under 4%. So we're doing things right, but we can always do it better and spend the money more wisely.
So to respond to that, Cord said that it would be of benefit to our community, that our quality of life wouldn't suffer. He was actively speaking positively about the Wildlife Stewardship District when he did come before the Board of County Commissioners. Now, to speak about New York compared to Florida, New York's economy is larger than ours, even though their population is shrinking. They do have a bigger budget because they're willing to wield their tax power to collect taxes, something that the state of Florida is unfortunately reluctant to do. You know, there's a lot of things that we could be investing in. There's a lot of things we could be doing to better our state, to build more sustainable cities, to not allow development to get out of hand. But we're not willing to step on the toes of the financial interests that exist right now. To answer your question, I would have to see where all the money is being spent. There are, like Ford said, things that we're spending money on that we shouldn't be spending money on, things that we should be investing our money more wisely. For example, in public schools, we spend a lot of money on the standardized testing. Where do the standardized tests come from? They're written by a corporation like Pearson Education. They're proctored by them. They're graded by them. That's money that we could be using for other purposes. To speak about our corrections facilities, or Florida correction failing, we have over-criminalized so many things in the state to the point where our prisons couldn't keep up with the number of people we were sending to prisons. So now we have a private prison industry springing up in our state. We shouldn't be helping fund private prisons that have a 95% recidivism rate, that don't help people get back into society. So I would say Florida's economy is quite large, and that budget in respect to our economy is quite small. Is that enough money? I don't think it is. I think we can be spending more money. I think we can be spending more money wisely, and we could be growing our economy and outpace New York in the next 20, 25 years.
I've got 3 questions that are going to be directed to 2 of you at the same time, and they're going to be requiring, in my opinion, yes or no answers. So go ahead, and hopefully we can keep it short, all right? Are either of you members of the NRA? Yes or no?
Yes.
No.
Do you believe a civilian should legally own a military assault weapon? Yes or no?
Reject the premise of your question. Define assault weapon.
Military assault weapon. Any weapon designed by the military and is available on the American market today. No, yes or no?
You need to define the terms. You're talking about legal terms.
All right.
What are you talking about?
All right. How about then an AK-47, AR-15, M60, and other assault type weapons?
M60 is a fully automatic weapon which is regulated by the federal government.
Yes.
You can't own
That's
that.
right.
Civilians can't own that.
How about the other 2?
AR-15.
AR-15. Or
Yes.
the
The
AK-47.
civilian version of the AR-15, yes. The civilian version of the AK-47, yes.
You own one?
I don't tell people what guns I do or do not own.
You what?
I don't tell people what guns I own.
Do you believe they should have the right to legally own one of these weapons?
The Second Amendment guarantees that.
Okay.
I would say that the Second Amendment doesn't guarantee that. The Second Amendment guarantees that we can bear arms, but that is a very old amendment. At that time, arms were very they weren't as deadly as they are now. I mean, modern weapons started to develop with rifling technology, which came during the Civil War. And the NRA started after the Civil War to help people learn how to fire these new weapons. Since that point, our government has actively barred certain weapons from being held by the public, like Tommy guns in the 30s are a perfect example. As gang violence started to increase, our government realized we need to start doing something about this. So they outlawed certain classes of weapons. The only thing that's missing now is the political will to say that we can ban certain classes of weapons.
So is that a yes or a no?
I know plenty of people who own AR-15s. I have no problem with civilians owning AR-15s. I think that AR-15s and weapons like that, high-powered rifles that can unload lots of bullets in a short amount of time, they should be, civilians should be allowed to own them, but they should be heavily regulated and they should be licensed, just like a lot of the antique automatic weapons are.
All right, third question. Do any of you, either of you, own military assault type weapons in the class of the AR-15 and the AK-47?
No, and he won't discuss it.
I don't tell people what firearms I do or don't own.
Okay.
It's a
Thank you
matter
very
of
much.
personal privacy.
Thank you.
I'm Mary Phillips. I'm president of the Nassau Education Support Personnel Association, Byrd Beach. And this is what I've been asking you this for quite some time, Mr. Byrd. But 2 years ago, I voted for you. I voted for you because you're the only one on the ballot. I'm a Democrat. And I switched, well, you might say switch parties. Doesn't matter if it's a deal or not. For the very first time, I lobbied in Tallahassee. And I hope I don't get emotional, but y'all, I'm very emotional about a lot of stuff right now. I met with you in your office. Do you remember that
I
meeting?
do, absolutely.
Do you remember what I told you, what I am with the school board?
Yes.
And what am I?
You're something para support personnel?
Education support professional.
Correct.
So I've been in education now for 18 years. I live, eat, sleep, and breathe it. I'm a union president. I'm pro-union. The other thing, let me talk about education first. When I met with you that day, you didn't know what an education support professional was. We are the bus drivers, we're the secretaries, cafeteria workers, maintenance, paraprofessionals. We are the ones that touch the children first. Okay, without us, the schools don't run. You got a little education. And then I asked you, I said, the only thing I'm asking of you is when you make those decisions, you make sure that you do not forget us when you're talking about the teachers, but make sure that you fund public education. And I think your answer to me was that you felt like everybody had a right to choose. And every parent does have the right to choose. They're going to put them in homeschool or whatever. But I'm here to tell you, since Rick Scott took office, he has taken more money from public education, and it's all going to charter and private schools. That has got to stop. Because everything, people don't know about these charter schools, but when the money goes to charter schools, you take money away from public ed. So all the computers, the supplies, and everything that goes to those schools doesn't get to come back. It's gone. Hold on, I'm getting here. You got to let me talk. I've been waiting a long time for this. But I want to know what you're going to do to fix. What will you do to fix public education? Both of y'all are going to, that's the question. Number two, I got to finish. You got to let me have this time. I've been waiting. Number two is my most passionate, other than education, Mr. Byrd. You were wrong when you signed HB 631, and I have worked my behind off since the summer started in May, taking my time off to notarize affidavits. And now the Citizens for Public Beaches and Shores of 1973 that I'm an executive member of, we're doing petitions to repeal that law. It is wrong. You say you're from Neptune Beach and that you love this beach. It's not right for the Ritz-Carlton to tell me I can't walk in front of that beach because it doesn't belong to them. They bought a view. That's all they bought. People that buy that property have no more right to it than I do or my child. And I'm going to fight with everything I have. But I want to know, if you're reelected, what you going to do to fix it? Because Mr. Scott, Rick Scott, came to Fernandina. He wasn't there for very long because he knew we were coming. Because we were going to come ask him questions. And what did he do? He said he would have an executive order. Really? That's not going to fix it. It's not. So I want to know, Nathcelly
mean, I know we're passionate, I know we have issues that are dear to us, but they're here to answer them. And let's try and remain civil. I understand the
I'm
emotion.
trying.
I know.
Thank you, Ms. Phillipson. And that's an example of speaking truth to powers. That's great. That's why I love being in American, we have representative government. And I do remember our conversation. About education. I'm just going to correct one thing. I do know what paraprofessionals do because I was a public school teacher before I went to law school in Dade County, Florida. I taught 7th and 8th grade civics at Madison Middle School. I taught at-risk students. So I, of course, know the bus drivers and the cafeteria people and all of the other support personnel. So I just want to be clear that, and clarify, I do know that. And also my mom sitting right here worked for Dade County Public Schools for more than 25 years. I'm a product of public education. I understand the importance of public education. But public education is broken in the state of Florida. And so I did tell you that I'm a pro-school choice person. I'm an all of the above, whether that's private school, charter school, home school, public school, because parents and students, we don't have a cookie cutter system. Not every child learns the same way. So I want to give those. I've been in a failing school. I have seen the generational decline in lack of education and what the harm that does to people. And so I want to make sure that every parent and every student has the opportunity to get a great world-class education. Charter schools are public schools. Well, let's just be clear about that. Charter schools are public schools in the state of Florida. But I'll give you an example. We passed this year the Hope Scholarships because bullying is a problem in our schools. Kids are being bullied. They are committing suicide. It is a terrible, terrible problem. So we enacted the Hope Scholarships that allow parents. We had a parent come and testify how her child ended up committing suicide because of the bullying in the school, and that they wanted to. They wish they had the opportunity to go to a private school or a charter school. So now we give parents and students that opportunity to escape failing schools and to get out of a broken system. And when we were talking about putting the education budget on the floor, we had, I think it was one of the mayor of Tampa or somebody over on the West Coast, and they said, oh, just give us 10 more years, don't change anything. In 10 years, we'll have this problem fixed. 10 years? That means that we were going to say to parents that if your child is in 2nd grade, that we'll get it fixed. They'll graduate before we fix this broken education system. That is unacceptable. It was unacceptable to me, and it was unacceptable to my colleagues. So I am not an opponent of public schools by any means, because I am a proud product of the public school system. But I am pro-parent, and I'm pro-student, and I'm support of giving them the opportunity and the choice to do what they need to do to get the best education for their child.
Okay, but how are you going to fund it? Because do y'all know that is segregation? Those charter and private schools, because poor black kids and Mexicans and kids of color can't go to those schools.
The lady in the back.
I have a question relative to that gentleman's question. You had stated that the Constitution was written a long time ago. Does that make you think that we need to revisit our Constitution or change it?
Absolutely not. All that I'm saying is that when our founding fathers said that we should have the right to bear arms, they were doing so because they believed that a standing army was the greatest enemy, the greatest threat to a republic. They wanted to make sure that we would never have to have a standing army. You know, our founding fathers were like intellectuals who read a lot of books leading up to the Constitutional Convention. And if you read the Federalist Papers, it's well outlined there that they wanted every citizen to have weapons so that we would obviate a standing army. But within 5 years of the Constitution passing, we had the American Legion on the frontier to help stave off Native American attacks on our villages. And by the time the 30th anniversary of our independence came, or the Constitution that we currently have, we were being attacked by England. So we recognized, okay, well, we do need a standing army. So we live in a difficult period right now because we can't have honest conversations about the history of our country, and we can't reckon with everything that's happened since the inception of our nation. Our founding fathers wrote into the Constitution the right to bear arms for a well-regulated militia would not be infringed for citizens, and so be it. That's what we have right now. But we need to respect the fact that it not only says that the right to bear arms will not be infringed, but that it's supposed to be within well-regulated militias. because well-regulated militias were supposed to be the ones protecting the states. I'm not saying that we need to revise the Constitution. I'm saying that we need to change with the times, because the times are always changing. And when we get stuck in old modes of thought, we retard progress. You know, we're at a point right now where our economy is going to be fundamentally changing, and we're still working with economic mindsets that have been around for 100 years, and it's just not going to cut it. So no, I don't believe that the Constitution needs to be revised. I just believe that we need to recognize the fact that the Constitution is a living document. Our founding fathers gave it to us so that we would have the powers to deal with problems as they arose within our nation, and that we would also have the power to amend it as we went.
Yes, in a similar vein, I'm going to read this because I think it's important and I want to get it right. So as we've discussed, and you admitted, current federal law prohibits the sale of fully automatic weapons, as well as military weaponry to the general public. For example, you can't buy an RPG, you can't buy an Abrams tank. So arms are already being prohibited. We don't need to revise the Constitution. What I want to understand is where you individually draw the line. Basically, I want to better understand where you draw the line between weaponizing, military weaponizing the general public, and between what's an arm and what we can regulate constitutionally going forward.
So, thank you for the question. Some of you may know this, some of you don't. So, the type of law that I practice is firearms law. I'm an expert in firearms law. That's what I do. State and federal firearms law. I go to state and federal court representing individuals on exercising their Second Amendment rights. This is something I know a little bit about because I've been doing it for the last 20 years. So firearms are one of those heavily regulated products that we have. When you're talking about military-style weapons, I mean, here's really the issue. The gun has not changed in more than 100 years. The gun that we have now is the same as it was at the turn of the century. You mentioned Tommy guns earlier. That's a fully automatic machine gun. An AR, the mechanism, the mechanical process works roughly the same. You take a Colt 1911, that was the year that John Browning patented the 1911. That gun is still widely in use today. We used to be able to order guns through the Sears Roebuck catalog, and they would mail them to you. So we no longer do that. You have to go to a licensed dealer, you have to purchase the gun, you have to go through a background check. So we have all of that today. It's harder to get a gun than it was 50 years ago. That's the Gun Control Act of 1968 changed the way we sell guns in this country. So it's harder to get the gun, but the gun hasn't changed. And in Parkland, it was an AR-15, and the shooting of the other day in Jacksonville, it was they were pistols. And this is what frustrates me to no end, and it was what I was arguing to my colleagues. We're always legislating to the last tragedy. And whether it's guns or something else, we're always trying to legislate to the last tragedy. We have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. And we're not going to magically we're not going to wave a magic wand and all the guns disappear tomorrow. That's not going to happen. There's 100 million guns in the United States. 100 million people own guns. There's probably 300 million guns in the United States. We're not going to go door to door and round them all up. We're not going to take them all away or wish them away. And I guarantee you, how's the war on drugs worked out for us? It's been an utter disaster for our country. So if we do away with all, if we got rid of all the guns, we would then have a black market in guns, and they would be coming across the southern border, and only the bad guys have guns. And let me finish with this.
I just want to know where you draw the line.
Let me finish with
military
this.
weapon and a civilian weapon.
Well, military. When you say military weapons, do you mean full auto as that is defined by the Code of Federal Regulations?
Where do you draw the line?
That's where I draw the line under the current state of law.
As it's written today, it's constitutionally perfect. The law is perfect in your mind. The line is drawn semi-automatic, perfect for everyone, and automatic, not.
The current, yes, under the federal law, which we at the state level have no control over, yes, I agree with the current state of federal law on guns, yes. But let me tell you this. So, let me tell you some of the people I represent. I had an African-American gentleman who was wrongly sentenced to prison. He served more than 30 years, and when he got out, because he got a pardon from the president, and he was having difficulty because the paperwork, just because of government and the bureaucracy, the paperwork was messed up. And he came to me and asked me for help, and I helped him because he says, I want to be able to defend myself. One of the other things I'm very proud of doing is I work with the Dolores Bar Weaver Foundation, and for the last 2 years, I filed appropriations to help women who've been victims of sex trafficking and sex crimes. I'm very proud of that work. And I have women that come to me and say, I refuse to be a victim. Never again will you help me exercise my Second Amendment rights. And I do that. And I'll give you another example. I had 2 gay gentlemen come to me and say, we refuse to be victims. We want to be able to exercise our Second Amendment rights. Will you help me? And I said yes. So, you know, we want to stereotype and we want to demonize, but there are real Americans, there are everyday Americans, and they don't care about being Republican or Democrat. They know they have a constitutional right and they want to exercise it, and that's what I help them do.
Now, I agree with Cord that we do a really bad job of addressing issues in our society. We are constantly legislating to the last tragedy, and shame on us for that. We can't seem to hold it together long enough to have rigorous, thorough, fact-based debates about what's happening within our society. And I find it very frustrating that every time I hear a gun rights advocate talk about gun issues, it always devolves into, well, we're not going to be able to wave a magic wand and get rid of all the guns. We can't take all the guns away. First of all, no one's talking about that. No one is talking about getting rid of all of the guns. There needs to be a gray space between free gun or perfect access to guns and no guns whatsoever. There needs to be a gray space in there which we can breathe and talk and figure out how to get a hold of gun violence in our communities. And to just say that, well, look at drugs. If you could get rid of drugs, we would have already gotten rid of drugs. Those are 2 very different things. Drugs are something that we have totally illegalized, and that is why there are black markets. If we illegalize guns, there would be black markets as well, but that's not what anyone is talking about. We are not talking about illegalizing guns. We are talking about taking steps to address gun violence in our communities, and that's the problem here. We can't have that debate. For whatever reason, the NRA is dead set ever since, as you said, the gun law that passed in the mid-60s. I want to say it was the Cincinnati Convention in 1977 when the NRA became radicalized, and they said, you know what, we're just going to go all out now. We're going to stand for gun rights. We're not going to allow any new laws to pass. They've stood in the way of research being done. They've stood in the way of us having a solid system for tracking guns. If the ATF has to do this stuff on paper, it's lunacy. So I just find that to be a false argument. That's just political posturing. And we need to be done with this. This needs to be a vestige of an old age. We need to be to the point where we can talk about these difficult issues and get a hold of them. Because that's what the Constitution gives us. It gives us the power to solve these problems. And when we devolve into this, we don't solve anything.
We have about 2 minutes left. See everybody's raising your hand, and then I will call on this gentleman in the back, okay? And the parents will be here afterwards for a little while, so if you were not able to ask your question, I'm sure they will hang around and answer it later.
I'd like to ask a response from both of you. I'm very interested in passing universal background checks nationally, but I'm wondering if we could do that in the state of Florida, and to make efforts to close the gun show loophole and the internet sales. To me, it would help a lot. I'd appreciate it.
40% of all guns sold in the state of Florida are sold without a background check. 40%. We can't accept it. We can change that on the state level. The only problem is that Marion Hammer has an office in Tallahassee, and she makes sure that nothing happens regarding gun laws in this state. We have preemption laws that Tallahassee has passed that keeps local governments from making any headway on solving gun violence in their communities. It's very frustrating to hear our elected officials talk about small government working, that we need to leave as much power to local governments as possible because local governments can solve problems best for communities, but then they actively stand in the way of communities doing what they need to do to protect themselves. So yes, we can in this state, pass a law that would require universal background checks on all guns. We just need the political will to do it.
Thank you.
And gentleman back.
So my question is to Representative Byrd. Can I infer from your
answer about gun control, or, because there are 300 million guns, that you similarly feel it's futile to try to regulate drugs or small petty drug crimes? And I have 2 questions. I have a follow-up too. Should I
Go
ask it
ahead,
now?
go ahead.
And my second one is, I just want to know your opinion on whether you think it's efficacious to arm teachers.
Good question.
So on your first question, there is a movement, and I'm part of that movement. There's a bipartisan movement in the legislature for criminal justice reform. It's no longer a left or right issue. We cannot incarcerate our way out of crime. I regularly tour the prisons, and being on the Justice Appropriations Committee, I go to the prisons and I see what's going on there and try to educate myself on that. So we're not going to incarcerate our way out of that. And so we are looking at, there was a bill last session to raise the felony threshold. Texas and Georgia have already done it. We haven't, we don't consider them bastions of liberalism. So Florida has lagged behind. We haven't adjusted for inflation. So those are just some of the things. So yes, criminal justice reform is at the forefront of some of the things that are happening in the legislature. And what was your second question?
Do you think it's efficacious to arm teachers?
So in the bill that passed last session, Senate Bill 7026, which I voted against, it has a provision for arming support personnel or teachers that also, it's kind of convoluted, but if you're a soccer coach and a teacher, you're allowed to. If you're only a classroom teacher, you can't. That was not my favorite. That wasn't my favorite thing to do. I think there are problems with that. I prefer fully funding SROs for all the schools in the state of Florida, hardening the schools. What happened after Parkland? Because politicians said we need to do something, and it drives me insane. And so they said, in a rush to do something, we rushed a bill through that not only violated the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens, it's not going to solve the problem. It doesn't. So instead of learning the lessons and seeing what happened in Parkland, because Parkland was really the result of a failure of government. The federal government failed, the state government failed, the local government failed, because the people who were charged with executing the laws didn't do their job. So what frustrates me, and what I didn't want to do, was put new laws on top of the laws that weren't already being enforced. Because it's easy as for politicians to go and pass something and say, look at us, we did it. And I told people at the time, I said, the next shooting won't be at a school, it'll be somewhere else. And we happen to know it was at a video game conference. So we need to put more money to mental health. We do a terrible job. Florida has failed in funding mental health. And we have used our prisons and our jail system to house and warehouse people who have mental health issues. They get abused in prison and jail. They don't get the medications they need. So we first need to get a handle on mental health, because whether it's the shooter in Jacksonville, whether it's the shooter in Parkland, time after time after time, when we finally find out about these people, it's someone who had been involved with the criminal justice system or the mental health system, who had been on all kinds of drugs. So that's where we need to put our focus. But we always want to say, oh, let's ban the guns. And by the way, the bill that was proposed by the Democrats would have banned every single firearm in the state of Florida except for a 5-shot revolver. That is the bill that was passed. So I'm glad to know you voted against that. Does that answer your question?
I couldn't disagree more. I have found zero mental health screen that would tell there's Vegas, and we talk about we're legislating to the most region.
But let me tell you. So we have a Baker Act. We have a Baker Act in the state of Florida, and under the Baker Act, someone can be taken in for 72-hour evaluation. After the end of the 72 hours, they can either be adjudicated or they can be let go. But what happens, because we don't fund, and I know this because I talk to the judges, I talk to the social workers, and they tell me what happens is they don't have the bed space to go in and adjudicate. So they don't take someone who is a danger to themselves or others. They don't adjudicate them, because if they adjudicated them, they would be put in the system, they wouldn't be able to buy a gun, they would get the help they need. That's what we need to put our focus on.
How much in mental health funding did you approve increase?
It's in Senate Bill 7026. I don't remember the exact numbers. There were hundreds of millions of dollars allocated to mental health and school funding. I don't remember the exact breakdown. Yeah, increased funding. We need to do more. It's not enough. That's clear.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a great, lively town hall discussion. I hope you guys will have a great time attending. But thank you. Thank you so much.
request. Those who are able, if you can pick up your chair and help us clear the room, we'll be out of here. Candace will be here.